Our scripture for today comes from the Gospel of John, chapter 11. Now a certain man was ill, Lazarus of Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. Mary was the one who anointed the Lord with perfume and wiped his feet with her hair. Her brother Lazarus was ill, so the sisters sent a message to Jesus, "Lord, he whom you love is ill." But when Jesus heard it, he said, "This illness does not lead to death. Rather, it is for God's glory, so the Son of God may be glorified through it." Accordingly, though Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus, after having heard that Lazarus was ill, he stayed 2 days longer in the place where he was. Then, after his disciples said, "Let us go to Judea again," the disciples said to him, "Rabbi, the Jewish leaders were just now trying to stone you, and are you going there again?" Jesus answered, "Are there not 12 hours of daylight? Those who walk during the day do not stumble because they see the light of this world. But those who walk at night stumble because the light is not in them." After saying this, he told them, "Our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I am going there to awaken him." The disciples said to him, "Lord, if he has fallen asleep, he will be all right." Jesus, however, had been speaking about his death, but they thought he was referring merely to sleep. Then Jesus told them plainly, "Lazarus is dead. For your sake, I am glad I was not there, so that you may believe. But let us go to him." Thomas, who was called the twin, said to his fellow disciples, "Let us also go, that we may die with him." When Jesus arrived, he found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb 4 days. Now Bethany was near Jerusalem, some 2 miles away, and many of the Jewish leaders had come to Martha and Mary to console them about their brother. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went and met him, while Mary stayed at home. Martha said to Jesus, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But even now I know that God will give you whatever you ask of him." Jesus said to her, "Your brother will rise again." Martha said to him, "I know that he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day." Jesus said to her, "I am the resurrection and the life. Those who believe in me, even though they die, will live, and everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this?" She said to him, "Lord, I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, the one coming into the world." When she had said this, she went back and called her sister Mary and told her privately, "The teacher is here and calling for you." And when she heard it, she got up and quickly went to him. Now Jesus had not yet come to the village, but was still at the place where Martha had met him. The Jewish leaders who were with her in the house consoling her saw Mary get up quickly and go out. They followed her because they thought that she was going to the tomb to weep there. When Mary came where Jesus was and saw him, she knelt at his feet and said to him, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." When Jesus saw her weeping and the Jewish leaders who came with her also weeping, he was greatly disturbed in spirit and deeply moved. He said, "Where have you laid him?" They said to him, "Lord, come and see." And Jesus began to weep. So the Jewish leaders said, "See how he loved him?" But some of them said, "Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying?" Then Jesus, again greatly disturbed, came to the tomb. It was a cave, and a stone was lying against it. Jesus said, "Take away the stone." Martha, the sister of the dead man, said to him, "Lord, already there is a stench, because he has been dead 4 days." Jesus said to her, "Did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God?" So they took away the stone, and Jesus looked upward and said, "Father, I thank you for having heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I have said this for the sake of the crowd standing here, so that they may believe that you sent me." When he said this, he cried with a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out." The dead man came out, his hands and feet bound with strips of cloth, and his face wrapped in a cloth. Jesus said to them, "Unbind him and let him go." May God bless this reading. We are into the beginning of Lent. It's the 40 or so days before Easter in which the church prepares itself for the events of Holy Week and for the resurrection itself. And we have been going through the Gospel of John and trying to understand a little bit more about what it is that the Gospel writer is trying to get across to us about who Jesus is. And it is giving us this very interesting story as we begin in Lent. You know, all of the stories in John in the first part of John, are what are called signs. They are these miracles that aren't just signs of Jesus' power, but rather they tell us something about who Jesus is. And Jesus, being Emmanuel, God like us, reveals what God is like, what is God's nature. So the miracles that we have seen Jesus perform tell us something about who God is. We've heard stories of abundance, we've heard stories of healing, we've heard stories of acceptance and welcome, and so we can surmise that God is like that. And this story, the raising of Lazarus, is the final sign. It's almost as though it is it's the icing put on the cake of Jesus' life. This is what it is all about. Jesus raises Lazarus from the dead. And in hearing this story and witnessing this sign, we can see the ultimate sign of who God is. God is the one who brings life where there is death. The rest of our gospel is what scholars call the book of glory. It tells the path of Jesus to the cross. And the path will bring Jesus face to face with the force that we are going to see during this season of Lent stands in opposition to Jesus' ministry. And that opposition, if Jesus is the one who brings life where there is death, then the opposition is death itself. And the story we are going to see is death being represented by a really real force in the world. That is Rome. So we are going to hear these stories in the coming weeks about his followers fearing for their own safety. We're going to even hear one of his followers deny him. And we're going to spend several weeks with Jesus face to face with Rome's emissary, Pontius Pilate. And in a way, the whole gospel feels like it is going in this direction. I got to thinking a little bit about the Gospel of John as a movie. Maybe you have seen a movie that has a moment like this where everything builds towards it and the energy builds up and you can feel the tension like something is going to happen. I was thinking about the movie Sinners, which if you haven't seen it is probably the front runner for Best Picture this year. But there's this scene in that movie where the movie tells the story of these two brothers who open a juke joint in the South in the 1920s, and it's meant to be this haven for black music and art. And in the movie, there's this character, Sammy, who's a young guitar player who's just being introduced to this culture, but has a gift, not just for music and singing and songwriting, but also for storytelling, for moving people with his art. And there's this scene in the movie where he is invited to sing his first song, and as he does, the energy builds, and the people dancing and singing along builds. And the way the movie tells the story, it is though past and future connect in that moment, and you literally see African tribe dancers next to futuristic guitar players all at the same time. And the scene bursts with this anticipation and meaning, and it builds so much that the building itself catches on fire, and the roof burns down, and the walls burn down, and it's just people dancing and singing under the stars. It's the scene that is electric. It's full of meaning. And if you haven't seen Sinners yet, you've probably witnessed this in other movies. You've probably been to that sporting event where you're waiting for the last shot to be taken and the energy. You've probably felt these moments where there is just something that's going to happen. You can feel it. And that's what's happening in the Gospel of John. The story is building to this confrontation, and it feels like it is going to burst. And today's story is like a little mini version of this. I don't know if you noticed it, but I noticed that all the pace in this story completely changes. Jesus slows way down, almost uncomfortably slow. He gets this message from Martha and Mary that Lazarus is sick, and they say, hey, you need to come now. And what does Jesus do? He stays in the same place for 2 days. And even his disciples are like, what are you doing? We need to go. But you can feel the tension, right? The suspense. We need to act now, but it's almost as though Jesus is working at a different pace than the rest of us. He's working in God's time, not our time. He is not in a hurry. Jesus decides then finally to go to Judea, and his disciples express their nervousness about going to a place where he almost met his end. And you can even hear in their voices that they are worried that if Jesus gets killed, they're not going to be far behind. And Jesus shrugs it off. But again, you can feel the tension building in this story. When Jesus finally shows up, he is late. Lazarus is dead, and the story doesn't want you to think that they've been mistaken. He's not just dead, he's 4 days dead. He is wrapped in the cloth that you wrap dead bodies in dead. The stone has been rolled in front of the cave dead. He is, if you move that stone, it's going to smell dead. The gospel writer does not want you to misunderstand what is going on here. Martha meets Jesus, and you can't quite tell if she's mad at him or if she's just so deep in her grief that she lashes out, or both. If he had been there, maybe this wouldn't have happened. Even Jesus himself weeps, a sign of his humanity, reminding us that he is like us, that he is moved in the same way that we are moved. The suspense and tension in this story is palpable. And then in the midst of it, Jesus tells them, roll away the stone. What would it have felt like to be there? What was the atmosphere like? Martha is worried about the smell, the body decomposing. But Jesus is working on his own time. And the sign needs to be just right. And it happens like a crescendo. Jesus calls, Lazarus, come out, commands him to rise. And Lazarus emerges wrapped in the cloth. And I wonder what it felt like in that moment to be there, like a movie, where everything's been building to this moment, where the plot grows in suspense, and the emotion finally bursts. In this story is the culminating revelation of who Jesus is. We've heard stories of abundance. We have heard stories of welcome and healing. Jesus is the presence of God with us. He is the one who has changed the lives of those who come into contact with him. And now we get this. Someone is brought back to life. Someone who was dead walks again. The story tells us that Jesus is the one who brings life out of death. And death is one of those words that is filled with lots of meaning. You know, in the Bible, and really in our world, death is not just simply the thing that happens when our life stops. Rather, when we talk about death and life, we're talking about words with bigger meaning. Just because you breathe doesn't mean you have life. There's more to it than that. And Jesus even comes, if you were here on Wednesday night, you heard from John 10, where Jesus says that he came not just to bring life, but life abundant. And in the same way, death is not simply what happens at the end of our life, but it represents the fear that we have for non-existence itself. If you think about our modern world, so much of science and technology and health is framed around what? It is framed around staving off death. Death is not just a biological fact when we're thinking about it. It is rather this symbolic thing about the thing we fear the most. And when we think about life and death in these ways, and we get this final sign of Jesus, we get the one whose life defeats death. It's not just that Jesus is preventing the thing that comes at the end of our life, but rather we should read it as so much more than that. Not just death as what happens when we die, but death as in lacking the necessities of life. Death as being excluded and outcast from community. The death of feeling like your life doesn't matter. Not just life as in having a pulse, but life as in having enough. Life as in belonging, life as in meaning and purpose. So who is this God who Jesus reveals? God is the one who defeats death. And as we enter these last days of Jesus' life, because I'm kind of amazed, between now and Easter, we're only going about a day and a half, 3 days, maybe, tops, in the biblical story. We are entering the last days of Jesus' life, his last meal with his followers, their denial of him, and his confrontation with Pontius Pilate, which leads to his ultimate death. And we see in these stories these two figures square off with one another. And it becomes clear through the story that the power of life will be represented by Jesus, and that death in the story goes by another name, Rome, the empire which takes life, which strips communities of identity, which is organized around hierarchy and exclusion, stands in opposition to God. So Jesus, as the one who represents life defeating death, will come face to face with all that the empire can throw at him, which we know includes death. I had this history teacher in college who told us about the Christian cross looks a lot like other religious symbols, right? If you've ever seen an ankh in the ancient Egyptian, it has like a little loop at the top, but it's a cross. And the professor was trying to say, well, maybe Christianity borrowed the symbol from Egyptian mythology. And you want to know what? No. The cross is one thing and one thing only. It is a public way to enact an excruciating death on someone. When we talk about the cross, we are talking about Rome's death cult, about the empire's desire to snuff out violently all who stand in opposition to it. And in Lent, we journey to that place where Rome was certain it would snuff out the life of Jesus, where it was certain it would end his life. But that's not how the story goes. And so we enter into the story now together. We prepare for that confrontation which is to come. We come to witness God's opposition to all earthly powers of death. And we begin Lent with this story today of the raising of Lazarus. And we see the sign, God is the one whose life defeats death. Amen.